Greetings, humans of the internet, and welcome once again to Bowtie Talks. Of course, I'm your excellent host, Luke Johnson, coming to you, as usual, from my undisclosed location in Midwest USA with some more historical insights. And now that we have covered the history of the American diners, I thought it would be a good time to discuss the history of another popular American summertime activity, and that is the road trip. Because I don't know about you, but I've always loved the idea of setting off onto some U.S. numbered highway, never an interstate, I hate interstates, but anyway, some U.S. numbered highway and driving it from start to finish, and stopping at every location that caught my eye. And I'm sure that many of you out there are probably doing that this summer. So please join me as I dive into the history of the Great American Road Trip. As I discussed in my episode about the history of the American automobile, the first car trip happened in 1880s Germany when Bertha Benz, the wife of Carl Benz, the founder of the Benz Auto Company, took her husband's then experimental automobile on a 66-mile drive through the countryside to visit her mother, and interestingly, the trip then was technically illegal. However, the American car trip would take more than 20 years to get off the ground. And for that, we have to flash forward to the year 1903. It was then that, while drinking at a club in San Francisco, California, a man named Dr. Horatio Jackson overheard some gentlemen in the club talking about how they thought this whole automobile fad was just that, a fad. The 31-year-old Jackson was an automobile enthusiast and said that he believed a four-wheel machine could, in fact, be driven across America, and agreed to a $50 wager that he could do it. However, there was a slight problem. Jackson not only did not have a car, but he also did not know how to drive one. However, he managed to convince a young mechanic and chauffeur named Sewell Crocker to be his backup driver, mechanic, and travel companion. Upon Crocker's advice, Dr. Jackson bought an automobile from the Winton Motor Carriage Company, and inside and out, they piled coats, rubber protective suits, sleeping bags, blankets, canteens, a water bag, an axe, a shovel, a telescope, tools, spare parts, a block and tackle, cans for extra oil and gasoline, Kodak camera, a rifle, a shotgun, and pistols. He then christened the vehicle the Vermont, kissed his wife goodbye, and on May 23, 1903, he and Crocker left San Francisco for New York. And I can't help but wonder what Mrs. Jackson was thinking during this entire time. What? You're gonna do what? You're going to pack into an automobile with someone you barely know and drive across the country. What are you thinking? That's probably what she was thinking at the time. That would be my guess, at least. But anyway, I digress. The entire trip cost about $8,000, including food, gas, lodging, tires, parts, other supplies, and the cost of the car itself. And the trip took 63 days, 12 hours, and 30 minutes after beginning their journey in San Francisco. And they drove into New York on July 26, 1903. 6 years later, on June 9, 1909, a 22-year-old named Alice Hyler Ramsey set out in a green four-cylinder Maxwell Motors touring car from Manhattan, New York, with 3 female passengers, her 2 older sisters-in-law and her 19-year-old friend, Hermine Johns, none of whom knew anything about cars, to become the first woman to travel cross-country in a car. They used maps provided by the American Automobile Association and traveled 3,600 miles of road, only 136 of which was paved. Sometimes they used telephone poles as guides, as the poles with more wires usually led to a town. This trip was not particularly easy either. In Nebraska, they crossed a trail where there was a manhunt for a murderer. And in Wyoming, Miss Ramsey got bed bugs from a hotel at which they were staying. And in Nevada, they were met by a hunting party of Native Americans, bows and arrows drawn on the frightened young ladies. And they arrived at the St. James Hotel 59 days after having changed 11 tires, cleaned the spark plugs, fixed a broken brake pedal, and once slept in the car when it was stuck in the mud. And in 1960, AAA named Alice Hyler Ramsey the, quote, woman motorist of the century. One important fact to note here, however, is during this time, automobiles were a luxury only afforded by the very wealthy. Car that Dr. Horatio Jackson used on the first cross-country road trip costs approximately $100,000 in today's cash. And this also gives me a chance to talk about what they may have faced in that first cross-country road trip. First of all, there were no paved roads between cities, and there were also no gas stations, which meant fuel had to be shipped ahead or purchased from general stores. And there were also no road maps. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, with there being no paved roads, breakdowns were inevitable, and they required creative repairs with materials like tape and wire, which just goes to show that not many things have changed. I have seen many men who can fix something using only spit and duct tape, which I'm sure came in handy on the early roads. And this now gives me a chance to discuss some of the early American highways. As I discussed on my episode on the history of the American highway system, the Lincoln Highway, which was established in 1913, was one of America's first historic highways and the first transcontinental highway, stretching 3,389 miles from Times Square in New York City to Lincoln Park in San Francisco, California. Although highway was really a generous term because much of it remained unpaved. As more and more people began using cars during the 1920s, thanks to the introduction of Henry Ford's Model T, which of course was the first automobile made affordable for the common man, the rise of a new form of vacation called tin can tourism began. Tin can tourism, of course, is a slang term for auto camping. They earned this nickname for several reasons. First of all, they drove metal automobiles, ate from tin cans, and camped in tin-like structures. In 1919, the Tin Can Tourists of the World organization was formally established in Tampa, Florida, and it eventually grew to include hundreds of thousands of members. And these early road trippers developed very creative solutions for overnight accommodations. These included tent attachments that connected right to cars, folding cots and portable stoves for roadside camping, house cars built by modifying existing vehicles, and municipal auto camps established by forward-thinking cities. And by the mid-1920s, an estimated 2,000 to 6,000 municipal campgrounds operated across the United States, many of which offered free or low-cost camping to attract traveling motorists and their money. And as travel changed, so too did cars and their, shall we say, accessories. Now, although backyard inventors have been converting vehicles for camping since the early 1900s, the Pierce Arrow Motor Car Company created one of the first purpose-built luxury motorhomes in 1910, which they called the Touring Landau, or Landau, I think is probably how it's pronounced. It featured a back seat that folded into bed and a sink with running water, among other accessories. And throughout the 1920s and 1930s, RV design grew quite a bit. In 1929, a man named Arthur Sherman built the first successful traveling trailer called the Covered Wagon after a rainy camping trip left him frustrated with camping in a tent. 2 years later, in 1931, a man named Wally Byam built Airstream trailers, eventually creating the iconic silver bullet design that is still seen today. And by 1936, there were over 400 travel trailer manufacturers that operated within the United States. And of all the roads that have been written about during road trips, perhaps none is more iconic than Route 66. The famed Mother Road, which was established in 1926, stretched over 2,000 miles from Chicago, Illinois to Santa Monica, California, and became the most famous highway in American history. Originally designated as U.S. Highway 66, it connected hundreds of predominantly rural communities across 8 states: Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And Route 66 helped create an entirely new American culture. Business owners along Route 66 competed for travelers' attention with increasingly elaborate attractions. Wigwam motels, which were concrete, teepee-shaped rooms, which still stand in Arizona and California. There's also the Blue Whale of Catoosa, which is an 80-foot-long whale-shaped building in Oklahoma. Cadillac Ranch, which is 10 Cadillacs buried nose first near Amarillo, Texas, and giant fiberglass statues featuring figures like Paul Bunyan, dinosaurs, and oversized produce. One of my personal favorites is the Big Texas Steakhouse, where if you can eat a 72-ounce steak and all the sides that come with it in under an hour, you get the entire meal for free. And if you don't eat it under an hour, you have to pay them $72. You think you could do it, folks? I'm kind of iffy on whether or not I could do it. If I fasted for the whole day and then just ate the steak, I could probably do it. Now, this gives me a chance to discuss the history of roadside attractions, because they have a history that dates back to even before the organized highway system. During the days before cars, many restaurants, hotels, and cafes would construct their exteriors to be outlandish or to produce a gimmick in the hopes of getting customers to stop there. One of the most notable of these roadside attractions is Lucy the Elephant, located in Margate, New Jersey. It's considered America's first roadside attraction. The building was completed in 1881 and served as a platform for the owner, James C. Lafferty, to sell adjacent land that would later become Atlantic City, New Jersey. Other early roadside attractions were places like Niagara Falls and in upstate New York and Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. People would stop at these awe-inspiring spots to stretch their legs and to experiencing something they may have never experienced before. And by the 1940s, U.S. road maps were dotted with roadside attractions that have now become icons. Places like the aforementioned Cadillac Ranch and various fiberglass statues along the roads. And following World War II, Americans embraced road travel with great enthusiasm. Between 1945 and 1960, the number of registered motor vehicles in America doubled from 31 million to 62 million. Annual vacation travel became an expected part of American life. The classic road trip experience would drastically change, however, in 1956 when President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, which authorized the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways and fundamentally transformed American road travel. The $25 billion project, which is roughly $275 billion in today's money, was the largest public works program in American history. And the new interstate system created standardized design, meaning 4 lanes minimum, controlled access and no traffic lights, consistent speeds, national connectivity, coast-to-coast travel could happen in days rather than weeks, and defense capability, meaning military vehicles could move rapidly in emergencies. And although the interstate highway system did make travel faster and safer, it was also doomsday for thousands of small towns and businesses along the old highway system. Communities that had thrived serving Route 66 travelers soon found themselves bypassed by the new interstate highway systems. Between 1956 and 1984, when Route 66 was officially decommissioned, hundreds of motels, gas stations, and diners closed. Small towns lost their economic lifeline. Roadside attractions quickly fell into disrepair, and a uniquely American cultural landscape began disappearing entirely. Road tripping would make a comeback during the 1980s when RVs became a mainstream vacation choice. And several developments drove this shift, including improved RV designs, campground expansion, a newly retired generation, and full-time RVing. And interestingly, we have seen a new sale in RV dealerships, and ownership, I should say, during the last 6 years. RV sales reached new records during 2020 and 2021. Younger demographics discovered RVing was a safe travel alternative, and remote work enabled road trips for so-called digital nomads. And with that, folks, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you now. And what have we learned today? Well, for one thing, I think we've learned that everything changes. Just because something lost popularity during one generation does not mean it won't come back during a later generation. After all, just look at new levels in RV sales during the past few years. And actually, it's always been a dream of mine to one day take US Route 50 from where it starts to where it ends. And so it's safe to say that road trips have definitely made their way back into the American mainstream. And with that, I say goodbye, God bless, and keep on trucking.